I would like to dedicate this video on Deep Digital to the work by Bob Martin. It's a long video on the future of programming, and in the end of that video he is going into what I like to call the emerging of novelty, what I used to call the novelty production in my PhD. And he clearly first describes it as a perpetual state of inexperience. So let me give the floor to Bob. He can explain it better than I.
In the 1995, tens of millions of programmers, half of whom have less than 5 years experience. If we're doubling every 5 years, then we always have half the programmers with less than 5 years experience, which leaves our industry in a state of perpetual inexperience. We cannot escape from this as long as we are doubling every 5 years. And that leads to a very unfortunate situation. There aren't enough teachers to teach the new people coming in. And so the new people coming in must repeat the mistakes made by everyone else over and over and over and over, and there seems to be no cure for this.
There is a cure, and that is to scale the teacher. So how do you start doing that? First of all, we need to introduce the concept of agile education. And now I need to be careful there. I'm talking about agile, adjective, to education. So it is about making education itself agile. It's not about teaching how to do agile development. Okay, we did do that as well, but the focus here is how do you make the course itself agile? And therefore, the question we were focusing on is very important. So I'll give a short video because there's a whole playlist where we've run this for 6 years. So I'll give you that short introduction video. Is how do you learn something that changed so fast that your knowledge is obsolete by the time you've learned it. So it's a way to deal with the fundamentally new, and the situation I was in front of is, on one hand, we had students and their skills, which basically were business students with a big technical background, so it's a master in business and technology. On the other hand, I was participating in a business ecosystem around Drupal specifically, and understanding how this self-organizing internet entrepreneurs do what they do. So from the internet entrepreneurs, I wanted to understand better what they were doing. So participation was the first way to penetrate that understanding. And then in actually 2010, I started interviewing all successful entrepreneurs within the past 5 years. So on the student skills, I also had several years of experimenting. The first year, the course was just about creating multiple languages. I've noticed that better the results came when students were creating Drupal modules. So in the beginning, I didn't want to push it because that was part of my participation research, but it's the outcome from the students themselves that showed me that I need a platform to work on. And then in the third year, I noticed that those that integrate APIs were performing the best. So it became a course on API integration, and that's basically how it stayed for the next years. So that's my personal funnel understanding. And if you go to the students, they had like a similar challenge. On the one hand, they had their student project where very clear intrinsic motivation was the sky's the limit. Whatever really, really touches you is the project you need to do. And on the other hand, you had the student skills. So again, there's a gap. How did the students penetrate their challenge? First, they needed to start blogging to make it more formally what they want to do. And later on, they start looking at APIs on how to integrate to the goal they wanted to reach. At the same time, students were taught how to program. Remember, these are business students, not software engineering students. So it's very rudimentary way of programming just to make sure that you could actually integrate these APIs and understand the bigger picture. That is how we demonstrated agile education. Now, notice that in this process, you start focusing on project-oriented education. The teacher basically becomes a coach, and that's a bottleneck, especially if you need to teach about 500 students. That brings us to the next part and to the scaling the teacher, where we demonstrate how to go to scaled agile education. Again, scaled agile is today used in a lot of methodologies for implementing the agile development at the level of a corporate structure. I have another video where I go into more detail on why I think those frameworks are costly and inefficient, and I would love to actually go way more deeper to elaborating that, because but here I like just to focus that what we're really going to do is scale the teacher, and I'll talk more about it, but first I want to show you the part where I talk about this in my PhD defense. It goes into more detail. You've just seen the funnel part for going to the agile education. It's part of a bigger methodology I elaborate in the PhD defense and in the PhD, of course. The next part is going to be what I like to call a horn. So you're going to expose it again, and so the funnel creates from an ID, an artifact. The horn will create from a product, a platform. And that platform will be the peer learning platform that demonstrates how you can actually have a cure to the problem Martin just posted. So a little bit about how we did that.
In 2006, and I think this is only 3 years later. So the amount of people involved in that project it was exponential. And it was an interesting understanding to see this transformation, this growth, and so on. But what was interesting, why specific Drupal? Because there was this crazy thing about the culture, where people expressed their love for this IT, right, for software, strange, in all kind of other ways. They start baking cakes, knitting sockets, create all kind of interesting logo variants because they like it. And so one of the conference, this was Paris actually, a guy starts running around in this. This wasn't created by the organizers, but just one company that was really fond of Drupal and the conference, and start doing that kind of crazy stuff. So culture, that's the thing. What is this culture underlining this self-organization? The interviewing, those are the companies I've all interviewed to figure out what their perception was of the whole evolution. So I'm not going to go into detail here. So that's the first part where I learned a lot about this process, this community. But then there was a thing about, okay, so how can we scale it up? Because the problem with the micro spin-offs is that it actually becomes pretty intense to the supervisor. So in 2010, 2011, we had a new opportunity. There was this course where 3 supervisors couldn't supervise 300 students. And the next year, 1 supervisor had to supervise 400 students. So it's, again, this radical challenge. So how do we develop a workspace for that? We've done it and it's worked, so it was successful. But that's more related to, we had a course, right? And it is about an education so adapting the content management system to become an education management system, call it, right? We had recorded lectures, we developed the instructions of how to reach it. So that's the phase we were when we got into this problem, this challenge. And then was a challenge, okay, so how do we now scale the teacher? To do that, we added a peer review system for learning. So that's based on, so it's an extra tool, right? It's not just having all the courses with videos and have blogs and all kind of interaction, things you know clearly from the online course systems today, but also have the peer learning. What was added to the instructional side, so we had first of all these recorded lectures, then we had the development instructions, and then eventually had also online coordination by peers. So we had this, basically we adapted, I think it's in the next slides, yeah. We had this issue queue like we know it from the software developers, and but this is just used by the developers to ping when there is a bug or a new feature or whatever, just to manage that. And we extended it to start using it for peer evaluation, so with the reviews and evaluations. And the top here you see one of these issues. So what is an issue? An issue is one part of a project assigned to one person, so something one person can do. It's a small building block of work that can be done by a person. So in projects you could have actually several people with many different issues, so it's more distributed in that sense. And what we added, for example, after, I mean, the active issues, the closed issues, the solved issues, that's green, white, and red, that's basically common to the software development stuff. What we added over here, the yellow part, is when it needs review. So what happens when it needs review, you can actually, as a student, add review. And that's what you see below here. This is an issue called financing higher education in Nigeria by a certain student. And then we had two other students creating reviews of it. And this review claimed it was a good issue, and this review claimed it was a so-so issue. It was okay. And then you see that the evaluations of this review showed that this one actually wasn't that good of a review. Well, this was a good review. And so the weights of these stars would count up into, oh, we don't have a presentation of that, but you can see it in the PG itself. It would count up to the score the students get for the course. And the whole thing, it was a very interesting learning curve of how this self-organizing can snowball using complexity, using a lot of psychology, like few autodidacts that would start, and then you would gradually have that curve from early adapters until the laggers that you need to pull into the system. So all this stuff was happening. And it also shifted the task of the teacher from, first of all, giving a good review, why was this a good issue, to giving evaluation, why was the review good or bad, to actually having a small army of students who were your assistants. So it shifts from the pure development and shifts all the way to people management, basically.
Okay, people management. That's actually going back to the scaled agile frameworks that these corporate organizations are trying to do, because basically a corporate is a collective, right? And what they need is they want the agile that is a lot more intelligent than and adaptive than the previous process. They want to scale it, so they need collective intelligence. The implementation of the platforms, that's where it becomes costly and inefficient. But that's basically because this philosophy of another way of looking at artificial intelligence didn't yet break through. So, and that's something I've been telling in many videos, so I'll do it again. You can take intelligence, you can put it into an algorithm, and then you can create complex automation, right? That's what you know mostly of artificial intelligence. But there are alternatives. You can take the intelligence, put it into a platform, and actually create a complex coordination. So that's linking to collective intelligence. So the thing is that because the collective intelligence, the way that works is scarcely known, it is understandable that that principle is not added into the agile frameworks. Therefore, it's hard for many people to understand what I'm saying here. So let me give a metaphor, right? We're talking about an exponential change, an exponential need in talent, exponential growth of knowledge, and all these things are accelerating. So the thing is, you need to be able to move faster. Now, there are two ways to do that. You can create a faster engine, but there's a limit to that. Because basically there are many, the environment itself becomes a constraint. So if you think about a car, one of the most past century solution to making transportation over land faster is creating highways. So a highway is a pretty technical and big infrastructure you build to make cars be able to go faster. So the thing is going to be even more interesting if you have algorithms on platforms. And sadly, we only know a very bad experiment, which is Cambridge Analytica using it to sell the elections. So that's a very clear example of how you use and the algorithms and the platforms to actually create a kind of collective behavior. Bob Martin is in fact also addressing this shadow side we see with the whole movement today. So let's just first listen to that story.
We're going to have to reunify the whole agile and craftsmanship movement, and we're going to have to lead. Somebody's going to have to lead because there's a problem. We are facing a disaster, and it's a disaster of somewhat large proportions. Civilization depends on us. Civilization doesn't understand this yet. We don't understand it yet, but I want you to think carefully. How many times per day does your grandmother interact with a software system? And at first you might think, well, she doesn't do anything in software. Well, she probably buys things. And you cannot buy something without interacting with the software system. And you cannot sell anything without interacting with the software system. You cannot get insurance. You can't make a telephone call. You can't watch a TV show. You cannot get into your car without interacting with the software system. You cannot turn on your microwave oven. You can't turn on your refrigerator. You can't wash your clothes without interacting with a software system. Anything you do in the modern world, you are interacting with a software system. Anybody know how many lines of code are in a modern car?
10 million in the volt.
10 million in the volt. 10 million lines of code. That should scare the hell out of you. And of course, not all of it is in the engine and stuff like that. Some of it's in the entertainment system and the GPS system and a whole bunch of software in there. But there is software that controls the throttle, if there is a throttle. There is software that controls the brake. Did you know that when you step on the brake, there is software in that loop? When you step on the accelerator, there is software in that loop. My wife has a car which has a front-looking camera and it can see the lane markings on the road. And if she begins to drift over the lane markings, the software in that system will pull the steering wheel back. There's software that can control the steering wheel. How many people have been killed by cars? Software in cars that have gone bad? Dozens. Dozens. There have been a number of people where the cars just run completely out of control. The brake won't work, the accelerator's down on the floor, the car accelerates out of control and smashes into something. There have been several dozen of those. There was actually a big suit not too long ago where Toyota had to pay out an awful lot of money because people were being killed and more were being injured because of software in cars. We are killing people. We did not get into this business to kill people, but we are killing people. And this is only getting worse and worse and worse. Our civilization depends on us. And they don't get it yet, and we don't get it yet. Although, there are hints. Did any of you watch the CEO of Volkswagen North America testifying before Congress as he blamed a couple of software developers for cheating the EPA. Oh yeah, it was a couple of software developers who did it for whatever reason. What a great line. Whatever reason. Now the weird part about that is that it was a couple of software developers, maybe more than two. But it was software developers who wrote that code. It was us who wrote that code to cheat. Some programmers wrote cheating code. Do you think they knew? If in test mode, I think they probably knew.
So I'm first gonna tell my own story on the shadow side within my participation research with Drupal. And then I'll come back to this notion that Bob Martin has about we need to go back to the discipline of the old school programmers because the world is depending on it. So that I will do in the second part. But first I want to get a little bit deeper in that shadow side, because that's actually something that hasn't been published in the PhD, because it's things that happened afterwards. So the participation research with the Drupal ecosystem stopped in 2014. And it's a very specific moment that happened. So I'll elaborate. So to do the participation research, I had all kind of interactions with the founders of the companies involved in the business ecosystem. And there is a very different space between 2005, 2010, and afterwards. So what happened? By the end of 2009, the founder of the community was allowed to start its own company. Before that, he was a PhD student, and in the contract with the university, he wasn't allowed to start a company. At that moment he did, and it was a huge company with a lot of venture capital. And I know that in the conference in Szeged, there was a lot of worry about how this would disturb the ecosystem. But in a sense, I still think that Acquia was one of the more better parts of corporate culture getting in. What you also saw were the more classical large corporates, like one of them one of the earliest was Capgemini, who went into the ecosystem. But that's not the most important part. Not so much the corporate, but the culture that got attracted, because this project was gold. And so what you see is that a lot of people who actually had not the right ethics of trying to change the world, save the world, which you clearly saw with the initial entrepreneurs, and the initial developers were just in love with a certain kind of technical challenge. But the people that got attracted now were people who were just in it for the money. They just wanted to get paid, and they want to be the part of the richness. And so that actually made that you got like ugly competition. Instead of friendly collaboration, you go into ugly competition. You see that therefore openness stopped. So one of the things I've noticed is that even the companies I was interacting with for several years just suddenly said like, sorry, but you cannot be part of this meeting anymore. We need to sign non-closure agreements before we can continue with our partners, and there cannot be any external parties. So those kind of, all these things kind of happened. And otherwise is that people taking a lead that totally didn't understand anything about the need of that ecosystem and community, and they just enforced another kind of culture on top of that culture. And what you see happening there is that like the most innovative companies, and I'm going to be very clear, one of the rockstar companies in the early Drupal ecosystem was Development Seed. And what you see is that it is one of the first big companies that lives in that period. And the biggest reason you can find in the interviews I done with the founder there is that their focus was they really wanted to be change humanity and focus on innovating in that sense. So when the whole Drupal got attracted by corporates, they decided to move and go into another direction, specifically around maps. So so you see that this whole ecosystem is changing, and another part is like I always after the keynote speak, I would talk with Dries, who was a friend and the founder of the Drupal, and I can remember when we co-organized DrupalCon 2006 that we were having a very deep debate about 2 hours long, and we only got interrupted once by someone who wanted a picture of him. Now, I kept talking with Dries after his keynote speak, when I was mostly in the European conferences, we mostly would have the time to do some discussions. But in 2014, I think it's 2014, DrupalCon Amsterdam, after the keynote, I was able to talk to him, I think, about 5 minutes. But in those 5 minutes, we got interrupted 7 times for someone who wanted to take a picture with him. And then after that 5 minutes, the organization actually came taking him away because he had responsibilities elsewhere. And so the picture that was in my head at that moment was a nightingale in a golden cage. And that picture never left me, and that is the moment I decided to stop the participation research with Drupal. So I kind of start looking at what is this corporate structure here? What is this thing happening? So in the past years, I've been way more trying to get into corporate structures. And again, what I see, it's very, very worrying. The way Agile is implemented, the way code is being developed. So I totally agree with Bob that there's this huge problem, but I don't agree with the way he looks at the discipline, because he shows that you have this developers discipline and you have the business discipline, right? But the thing is that for the responsibility we need today, we need to mix it. And in my most recent participation, which is mostly with coaches, right, in the environment of coaches, and it's now more directed to implementation of things like Sociocracy 3.0, and about implementing the new style of organizations, about open cooperatives, about reinventing organizations, that kind of. So it's another kind of sphere, but we are not at all there yet to connect this back to the more harder science we know as software developers. And that brings me back to the other part. It says we need those hard skills. What you see in the experiment I did with the scaled agile education is that yes and no. The essence is we need to start becoming leaders. And what I demonstrate there is that how was I able to supervise 300 projects while normally you could only supervise 30 projects? It is because I had an army of assistants. So I've been applying the same techniques and methods and discipline, but then to people, not to software. So my suggestion is that we need to start treating people as software. That's a bold claim. I probably need to start talking and interacting more about that. Now, but it's been already a long video. I wanna close here, and I want actually invite people to watch the whole movie, because things I haven't talked in this video is about the first 50 minutes of Bob's presentation, and also a little bit later on, where he actually very shows this exponential growth. And that, of course, links very clearly to the technological singularity, which is one of the first videos that starts this channel. So there are some way more interesting overlaps, but that's more spread, so I couldn't capture a clear shot of that. So I don't want to finish myself. I first want to go back to Bob Martin.
We rule the world. The world doesn't know this yet. We don't quite know it yet. Other people believe that they rule the world, but they write the rules down and they hand them to us. And then we write the rules that go into the machines that execute everything that happens on this planet nowadays. No law can be enacted without software. No law can be enforced without software. No government can act without software. We rule the world. And one day, one of us is going to do something dumb, and maybe not even that dumb, and the result will be a catastrophe where tens of thousands of people die. And you can imagine what it would be. There's a whole bunch of possibilities there. Plane crashes into a football stadium. And when this happens, and it will happen, it has to happen, it's just a matter of time. When this happens, the politicians of the world will rise up, as they should, in righteous indignation, which they should have, and they will point their fingers right at us, and they will ask us the question, how could you have let this happen?
I got a bit of bad news. It already happened. It already happened. That's what Cambridge Analytica is about. That's why you see all these lawsuits against Facebook. But the thing is that what Bob is talking about specifically in like the operational part of the code, the relation is not yet seen on how that actually is the same as what is happening on social media. And the craziness you see happening today, and I mean, okay, I'm from Europe, but we do see that in the United States, the polarization, it's like, what the hell is happening there? Who the hell is in the White House? But if you look at Europe, think about Brexit, what we have is like the madness in our structures. But it seems to be, or the madness is in the structures, or the madness is in the polarization. But the essence is, this is the effect of code. This is the effect of software eating the world. And I cannot emphasize enough on this, because I've claimed this several times before. I'm very, very worried about a new generation of teenagers who are going to puberty with this code being active, which is going probably not just kill 1,000 people, but probably is just going to mean that in a few generations, people will not have any awareness anymore. I'm very, very serious about that. I'm very, very worried. I see the technological singularity coming closer in this and 20 years. And I'm wondering, is this the domestication of our own awareness in such a way that we become cattle, that it goes even beyond the imagination of being economical slaves. This is about being a cognitive slave, being a slave to intelligence. It's okay. So just gonna wrap up with that, because okay, so it is a bit dark to end up on this note. So let me end up with a spark of hope. I actually can see a very clear way out. The problem is, it's the way less traveled, and therefore it is pretty hard to talk about it. It's already hard to talk about things like scaled agile education, and that at least links to a tendency that exists today. So I will promise that in next video I'm going to address the hope, and I'm pretty sure, because I've been working on that video for several weeks now, and the problem, I trying to get it coherent, and that's a little bit the challenge. But that's going to be one where I'll talk more about hope. So I hope to see you next time. If you have questions, you have contributions to a discussion, if you want to connect, I want to change the world. So reach out. Have a nice day.